Hello and welcome to week 1 of the book club, the summer 2022 book Club-o-Rama. I'm Hannah and this is the no-show book club. Let's see, what is the update? Erin successfully made it to Ireland. And Ben went to Canada. He's home now, but he's going to be leaving again in a couple weeks. Kylie got an incredibly awesome tattoo while they were in Canada. Other than that, everything's going pretty good. Hope you're having a really great June so far. Happy fucking Pride. I know that if Erin was here, she would say that Pride in Durham is actually in September. And as far as I'm concerned, that's neither here nor there, because it's rainbow season, baby. By the end of this month, I'll have an even more queer haircut because I'm going to go get the sides trimmed in Northampton, the lesbian capital of Massachusetts. I think I already talked about this on the podcast. Anyway, this week I'm bringing you a remaster of, chapters 1 through 6. I tried to cut out all of the extraneous kind of time-bound, meaning sort of its time commentary at the beginning and the end, but I did leave in commentary towards the end of the episodes that was actually about the chapters that I just read, because it's still relevant. It's still how I feel. And it also helps to make this transformative content rather than just reading out a book. So this is chapters 1 through 6. Another couple things I noticed. Okay, well, the transitions might be a little bit awkward. I tried my best to make it so you could kind of tell when a new chapter was starting. I think chapter 6, I don't announce that it's chapter 6. So it just goes kind of straight from commentary on 5 into 6. And also you'll notice maybe that my voice is a lot deeper when I read chapter 5. And that would be because that's when I had, it's not laryngitis, but I got the cold over Thanksgiving and then I lost my voice for several weeks. And it was still on the mend when that was recorded. So I noticed it, so you might notice it. And I did take out this kind of warning at the beginning of every week, so I will restate it here. If you haven't heard these before, it's your first time listening to them, just know that this is not an audiobook. It's more like a bedtime story. So when I'm reading it, I mess up and I don't edit a lot of that out. I just kind of reread it. You can hear the book rustling. You can hear, maybe sometimes I'll take a break and clear my throat or whatever. It's not a polished reading of the book. It's more like you're hanging out with me and I'm reading it to you. So if that's not your jam, that's fine. But just be aware that that's what this is. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you next week for chapters 7 through 12. We all love you. And, that was not my voice cracking. I just have one thing stuck in my throat. But yes, have a great week. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye. So we begin with chapter 1. That fool of a fairy Lucinda did not intend to lay a curse on me. She meant to bestow a gift. When I cried inconsolably through my first hour of life, my tears were her inspiration. Shaking her head sympathetically at Mother, the fairy touched my nose. My gift is obedience. Ella will always be obedient. Now stop crying, child. I stopped. Father was away on a trading expedition as usual, but our cook Mandy was there. She and Mother were horrified, but no matter how they explained it to Lucinda, they couldn't make her understand the terrible thing she'd done to me. I could picture the argument, Mandy's freckles standing out sharper than usual, her frizzy gray hair in disarray, her double chin shaking with anger. Mother still and intense, her brown curls damp from labor, the laughter gone from her eyes. I couldn't imagine Lucinda. I didn't know what she looked like. She wouldn't undo the curse. My first awareness of it came on my 5th birthday. I seem to remember the day perfectly, perhaps because Mandy told the tale so often. For your birthday, she'd start, I baked a beautiful cake, 6 layers. Bertha, our head maid, had sewn a special gown for me. Blue as midnight with a white sash. You were small for your age even then, and you looked like a china doll, with a white ribbon in your black hair and your cheeks red from excitement. You're going to have to bear with me on the voices, and I might do a little start and stop. I'm not going to edit this too heavily. Thank you. I love you very much. Oh, that was Hannah editorializing. In the middle of the table was a vase filled with flowers that Nathan, our manservant, had picked. We all sat around the table. Father was away again. I was thrilled. I had watched Mandy bake the cake and Bertha sew the gown, and Nathan pick the flowers. Mandy cut the cake. When she handed me my piece, she said without thinking, "Eat." The first bite was delicious. I finished the slice happily. When it was gone, Mandy cut another. That one was harder. When it was gone, no one gave me more, but I knew I had to keep eating. I moved my fork into the cake itself. "Ella, what are you doing?" Mother said. "Little piggy," Mandy laughed. "It's her birthday, lady. Let her have as much as she wants." She put another slice on my plate. I felt sick and frightened. Why couldn't I stop eating? Swallowing was a struggle. Each bite weighed on my tongue and felt like a sticky mass of glue as I fought to get it down. I started crying while I ate. Mother realized first. "Stop eating, Ella," she commanded. I stopped. Anyone could control me with an order. It had to be a direct command, such as put on a shawl or you must go to bed now. A wish or a request had no effect. I was free to ignore, "I wish you would put on a shawl," or "Why don't you go to bed now?" But against an order, I was powerless. If someone told me to hop on one foot for a day and a half, I'd have to do it. And hopping on one foot wasn't the worst order I could be given. If you commanded me to cut off my own head, I'd have to do it. I was in danger at every moment. As I grew older, I learned to delay my obedience, but each moment cost me dear, in breathlessness, nausea, dizziness, and other complaints. I could never hold out for long. Even a few minutes was a desperate struggle. I had a fairy godmother, and Mother had asked her to take the curse away, but my fairy godmother said Lucinda was the only one who could remove it. However, she also said it might be broken someday without Lucinda's help. But I didn't know how. I didn't even know who my fairy godmother was. Instead of making me docile, Lucinda's curse made a rebel of me. Or perhaps I was that way naturally. Mother rarely insisted I do anything. Father knew nothing of the curse and saw me too infrequently to issue many commands. But Mandy was bossy, giving orders almost as often as she drew breath. Kind orders, or for your own good orders, bundle up, Ella, or hold this bowl while I beat the eggs sweet. I disliked these commands, harmless as they were. I'd hold the bowl, but move my feet so she would have to follow me around the kitchen. She'd call me a minx and try to hem me in with more specific instructions, which I would find new ways to evade. Often it was a long business to get anything done between us, with Mother laughing and egging each of us on by turn. We'd end happily, with me finally choosing to do what Mandy wanted, or with Mandy changing her order to a request. When Mandy would absentmindedly give me an order I knew she didn't mean, I'd say, "Do I have to?" And she'd reconsider. When I was 8, I had a friend, Pamela, the daughter of one of the servants. One day, she and I were in the kitchen watching Mandy make marchpane. When Mandy sent... I don't know if that's how you say that word. But when Mandy sent me to the pantry for more almonds, I returned with only 2. She ordered me back with more exact instructions, which I followed exactly while still managing to frustrate her true wishes. Later, when Pamela and I retreated to the garden to devour the candy, she asked why I hadn't done what Mandy wanted straight off. "I hate when she's bossy," I answered. Pamela said smugly, "I always obey my elders." "That's because you don't have to." "I do have to, or Father will slap me." "It's not the same as for me. I'm under a spell." I enjoyed the importance of the words. Spells were rare. Lucinda was the only fairy rash enough to cast them on people. "Like Sleeping Beauty?" "Exactly. Except I won't have to sleep for 100 years. It doesn't say exactly. It says, "Except I won't have to sleep for 100 years. "What's your spell?" I told her. "If anybody gives you an order you have to obey, including me?" I nodded. "Can I try it?" "No." I hadn't anticipated this. I changed the subject. "I'll race you to the gate." "All right, but I command you to lose the race." "Then I don't want to race." "I command you to race, and I command you to lose." We raced. I lost. We picked berries. I had to give Pamela the sweetest, ripest ones. We played princesses and ogres. I had to be the ogre. An hour after my admission, I punched her. She screamed and blood poured from her nose. Our friendship ended that day. Mother found Pamela's mother in a new situation, far from our town of Frel. After punishing me for using my fist, Mother issued one of her infrequent commands, never to tell anyone about my curse. But I wouldn't have anyway. I had learned caution. When I was almost 15, Mother and I caught cold. Mandy dosed us with her curing soup, made with carrots, leeks, celery, and hair from a unicorn's tail. It was delicious, but we both hated to see those long yellow-white hairs floating around the vegetables. Since Father was away from Frel, we drank the soup sitting up in Mother's bed. If he'd been home, I wouldn't have been in her room at all. He didn't like me to be anywhere near him, getting underfoot, as he said. I sipped my soup with the hairs in it because Mandy had said to, even though I grimaced at the soup and at Mandy's retreating back. I'll wait for mine to cool, Mother said. Then after Mandy left, she took the hairs out while she ate and put them back in the empty bowl when she was done. The next day, I was well and Mother was much worse, too sick to drink or eat anything. She said there was a knife in her throat and a battering ram at her head. To make her feel better, I put cool clothes on her forehead and told her stories. They were only old familiar tales about fairies that I changed here and there, but sometimes I made Mother laugh, except the laughter would turn into a cough. Before Mandy sent me off for the night, Mother kissed me. Good night, I love you, precious. They were her last words to me, and as I left the room, I heard her last words to Mandy. I'm not very sick. Don't send for Sir Peter. Sir Peter was Father. The next morning, she was awake, but dreaming. With wide open eyes, she chatted to invisible courtiers and plucked nervously at her silver necklace. To Mandy and me, there in the room with her, she said nothing. Nathan, the manservant, got the physician who hurried me away from my mother's side. Our hallway was empty. I followed it to the spiral staircase and walked down, remembering the times Mother and I had slid down the banister. We didn't do it when people were around. We have to be dignified, she would whisper then, stepping down the stairs in an especially stately way. And I would follow, mimicking her and fighting my natural clumsiness, pleased to be part of her game. But when we were alone, we preferred to slide and yell all the way down, and run back up for another ride, and a third, and a fourth. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I pulled our heavy front door open, and slipped out into the bright sunshine. It was a long walk to the old castle, but I wanted to make a wish, and I wanted to make it in a place where it would have the best chance of being granted. The castle had been abandoned when King Gerald was a boy, although it was reopened on special occasions for private balls, weddings, and the like. Even so, Bertha said it was haunted, and Nathan said it was infested with mice. Its gardens were overgrown, but Bertha swore the candle trees had power. I went straight to the candle grove. The candles were small trees that had been pruned and tied to wires to make them grow in the shape of a candelabra. For wishes, you need trading material. I closed my eyes and thought, if Mother gets well quick, I'll be good, not just obedient. I'll try harder, not to be clumsy, and I won't tease Mandy so much. I didn't bargain for Mother's life because I didn't believe she was in danger of dying. That's the end of chapter 1. So, I talked about the pacing in the episode this week, and I feel like the first chapter is like a really good example because she tells you everything that you need to know about like her history, her family, her household, and gets to the first big beat of the story, which is her mother dying. Like that was, how many pages was that? In 6 pages. It's page 3 to page 9. So it's just well crafted. I do just love it. I'm going to read chapter 2 and I think also 3. So here we go. Leaving behind a grieving husband and child. We must comfort them. High Chancellor Thomas wound down after droning on for almost an hour. Some of his speech had been about Mother. At least the words Lady Eleanor were spoken often. But the person they described, dutiful parent, loyal citizen, steadfast spouse, sounded more like the High Chancellor than like my mother. Part of the speech had been about dying, but more was about giving allegiance to Curia and its rulers, King Gerald, Prince Charmant, and the entire royal family. Father reached for my hand. His palm was moist and hot as a hydra swamp. I wished I had been allowed to stand with Mandy and the other servants. I pulled out of his grasp and moved a step away. He closed the distance between us and took my hand again. Mother's casket was made of gleaming mahogany, carved with designs of fairies and elves. If only the fairies could leap out of the wood and cast a spell to bring her back to life. And another one to send Father away, or maybe my fairy godmother would do it, if I knew where to find her. When the High Chancellor finished, it was my task to close the casket so Mother could be lowered into her grave. Father put his hand on my shoulders and pushed me forward. Mother's mouth was stern, the opposite of its look in life, and her face was empty, which was awful. But worse was the creak of the coffin as the coffin lid went down and the dry click when it closed, and the thought of Mother packed away in a box. The tears I had swallowed all day erupted. I stood there before the whole court, crying in an infant's endless wail, unable to stop myself. Father pressed my face into his chest. Perhaps he appeared to be comforting me, but he was only trying to muffle my noise, which couldn't be muffled. He let me go. In a sharp whisper, he said, "Get away from here. Come back when you can be quiet." I'm sorry if I'm going a little fast. I feel a bit energized tonight. This is Hannah, not part of the book. Also, I warned last time about this, but there's going to be paper noises, like page noises. There's going to be things I say wrong. This isn't an audiobook. It's like a bedtime story, more like that. Okay? Get away from here. Come back when you can be quiet. For once, I was glad to obey. I ran. My heavy black gown tripped me, and I fell. Before anyone could help me, I was off again, my knee and hand stinging. The biggest tree in the graveyard was a weeping willow, a crying tree. I plunged through its leaves and threw myself down, sobbing. Everyone called it losing mother, but she wasn't lost. She was gone, and no matter where I went, another town, another country, fairyland or gnome caverns, I wouldn't find her. We'd never talk again, or laugh together, or swim in the river Lucarno, or slide down the banister, or play tricks on Bertha, or a million things. I cried myself out and sat up. My gown had changed in front from black silk to brown dirt, and as Mandy would have said, I was a spectacle. How much time had gone by? I had to go back. Father had told me to, and the curse was tugging at me to obey. Outside the privacy of my tree, Prince Charmant stood, reading a tombstone. I had never been so near him before. Had he heard me cry? Although the prince was only 2 years older than I, he was much taller, and he stood just like his father, feet apart, hands behind his back, as though the whole country were passing by on review. He looked like his father, too, although the sharp angles of King Gerald's face were softened in his son. They each had tawny curls and swarthy skin. I had never been near enough to the king to know whether he also had a sprinkling of freckles across his nose, surprising on such a dark face. Cousin of mine, the prince said, gesturing at the tombstone. Never liked him. I liked your mother. He started walking back toward her tomb. Did he expect me to come with him? Was I supposed to maintain a suitable distance from his royal self? With enough room for a carriage to pass between us, I walked at his side. He moved closer. I saw he had been crying too, although he had stayed upright and clean. You can call me Char, he told me suddenly. Everyone else does. I could? We walked in silence. My father calls me Char too, he added. The king. Thank you, I said. Thank you, Char, he corrected me. Then, your mother used to make me laugh. Once, at a banquet, Chancellor Thomas was making a speech. While he talked, your mother moved her napkin around. I saw it before your father crumpled it up. She had arranged the edge in the shape of the chancellor's profile, with the mouth open and the chin stuck out. It would have looked exactly like him if he were the color of a blue napkin. I had to leave without dinner so I could go outside and laugh. I mean, it seems like your standards were a little low, but I guess they didn't have TV back then. Back then in fantasy times. We were halfway back. It was starting to rain. I could make out one figure, small in the distance, standing by Mother's grave. Father, where did everyone go? I asked Char. They all left before I came to find you, he said. Did you want them to wait? He sounded worried, as if, perhaps, he should have made them stay. No, I didn't want any of them to wait, I answered, meaning Father could have gone too. I know all about you, Char announced after we'd taken a few more steps. You do? How could you? Your cook and our cook meet at the market. She talks about you. He looked sideways at me. Do you know much about me? No. Mandy had never said anything. What do you know? I know you can imitate people, just like Lady Eleanor could. Once you imitated your manservant to his face, and he wasn't sure whether he was the servant or you were. You make up your own fairy tales, and you drop things and trip over things. I know you once broke a whole set of dishes. I slipped on ice! Ice chips you spilled before you slipped on them, he laughed. It wasn't a ridiculing laugh. It was a happy laugh at a good joke. An accident, I protested, but I smiled too. Tremblingly, after so much crying. We reached Father, who bowed. Thank you, Highness, for accompanying my daughter. Char returned the bow. Come, Eleanor, Father said. Eleanor. No one had ever called me that before, even though it was my real name. Eleanor had always been my mother, and always would be. Ella, I'm Ella, I said. Ella, then. Come, Ella. He bowed to Prince Charmant and climbed into the carriage. I had to go. Char handed me in. I didn't know whether to give him my hand or to let him push me up by my elbow. He wound up with the middle of my arm. I had to grasp the side of the carriage with the other hand for balance. When he closed the door, I caught my skirt, and there was a loud ripping sound. Father winced, and I saw Char through the window, laughing again. I turned the skirt and found a gash about 6 inches above the hem. Bertha would never be able to make it smooth. I arranged myself as far from Father as possible. He was staring out the window. A fine affair. All of Frel came, everyone who counts anyway, he said, as though Mother's funeral had been a tournament or a ball. It wasn't fine, it was awful, I said. How could Mother's funeral be fine? The prince was friendly to you. He liked Mother. Your mother was beautiful. His voice was regretful. I'm sorry, she's dead. Nathan flicked his whip, and the carriage began to move. So that's chapter 2. Ella meets Char. Prince Charmant being pretty obvious. I guess in French, charming would be charmant. And so Charmant it's just simply not a name. I don't love it. I'll be honest. I wouldn't lie to you guys. But a very thoughtful and kind meeting. Seems like a nice dude. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to also read chapter 3 because it's very short. When we reached the manor, Father ordered me to change into something clean and to hurry down to greet the guests who were arriving to pay their respects. My room was peaceful. Everything was just as it had been before Mother died. The birds embroidered into the coverlet on my bed were safe in their world of cross-stitched leaves. My diary was on the dresser. The friends of my childhood, Flora the rag doll, and Rosamund, the wooden doll in the gown with 7 flounces, nestled in their basket. I sat on the bed, fighting my need to obey Father's order to change and go back downstairs. Although I wanted to draw comfort from my room, from my bed, from the light breeze coming through my window, I kept thinking instead of Father and getting dressed. Once I had overheard Bertha tell Mandy that she was only a person on the outside. No, that he was only a person on the outside and that his insides were ashes mixed with coins and a brain. But Mandy had disagreed. He's human through and through. No other creature would be as selfish as he is, not fairies or gnomes or elves or giants. Oh, yeah, that's another thing. I think that's also the first time you really get to meet the Father at all. He's terrible. You'll see. For a full 3 minutes, I delayed getting dressed. It was a terrible game I played, trying to break my curse, seeing how long I could last against the need to do what I had been told. There was a buzzing in my ears, and the floor seemed to tilt so far that I feared I would slide off the bed. I hugged my pillow until my arms hurt, as if the pillow were an anchor against following orders. In a second, I was going to fly apart into 1,000 pieces. I stood and walked to my wardrobe. Immediately, I felt perfectly fine. Although I suspected Father wanted me to wear another morning gown, I put on the frock Mother liked best. She said the spicy green brought out my eyes. I thought I looked like a grasshopper in it, a skinny, spiky grasshopper with a human head and straight hair. But at least the gown wasn't black. She hated black clothing. The great hall was full of people in black. Father came to me instantly. "Here's my lass, young Eleanor," he said loudly. He led me in, whispering, "You look like a weed in that gown. You're supposed to be in mourning. They'll think you have no respect for your—" I was engulfed from behind by 2 chubby arms encased in rustling black satin. "My poor child, we feel for you." The voice was syrupy. "And Sir Peter, it's so dreadful to see you on such a tragic occasion." An extra tight squeeze, and I was released. The speaker was a tall, plump lady with long and wavy, honey-colored tresses. Her face was a pasty white with twin spots of rouge on the cheeks. With her were 2 smaller versions of herself, but without the rouge. The younger one also lacked her mother's abundant hair. Instead, she had thin curls tight to her scalp as though glued there. "This is Dame Olga," Father said, touching the tall lady's arm. I curtsied and knocked into the younger girl. "Beg pardon," I said. She didn't answer, didn't move, only watched me. Father continued, "Are these your lovely daughters?" "These are my treasures. This is Hattie, and this is Olive. They are off to finishing school in a few days." I regret this voice immediately. Hattie was older than I by about 2 years. "Delighted to make your acquaintance," she said, smiling and showing large front teeth. She held her hand out to me as though she expected me to kiss it or bow over it. I stared, uncertain what to do. She lowered her arm but continued to smile. Olive was the one I'd bumped. "I'm glad to meet you," she said, her voice too loud. She was about my age. The furrows of a frown were permanently etched between her eyes. "Comfort Eleanor in her grief," Dame Olga told her daughters. "I want to talk with Sir Peter." She took Father's arm, and they left us. "Our hearts weep for you," Hattie began. "When you bellowed at the funeral, I thought what a poor thing you are." "Green isn't a mourning color," Olive said. Hattie surveyed the room. "This is a fine hall, almost as fine as the palace where I'm going to live someday. Our mother, Dame Olga, says your father is very rich. She says he can make money out of anything." "Out of a toenail," Olive suggested. "Our mother, Dame Olga, says your father was poor when he married your mother. Our mother says Lady Eleanor was rich when they got married, but your father made her richer." "We're rich too," Olive said. "We're lucky to be rich." "Would you show us the rest of the manor?" Hattie asked. We went upstairs and Hattie had to look everywhere. She opened the wardrobe in Mother's room, and before I could stop her, ran her hands over Mother's gowns. When we got back to the hall, she announced, 42 windows and a fireplace in every room. The windows must have cost a trunk full of gold KJs. Do you want to know about our manor? Olive asked. I didn't care if they lived in a hollow log. You'll have to visit us and see for yourself, Hattie said, in response to my silence. We stood near the side table, which was loaded with mountains of food, from a whole roast heart with ivy threaded through its antlers to butter cookies as small and lacy as snowflakes. I wondered how Mandy had had time to cook it all. Would you like something to eat? Yeah, Olive began, but her sister interrupted firmly. Oh, no. No, thank you. We never eat at parties. The excitement quite takes away our appetites. My appetite, Olive tried again. Our appetites are small. Mother worries. But it looks delicious. Hattie edged toward the food. Quail eggs are such a delicacy. 10 brass KJs apiece. Olive, there are 50 at least. More quail eggs than windows. I like gooseberry tarts, Olive says. We mustn't, Hattie said. Well, maybe a little. A giant couldn't eat half a leg of deer plus a huge mound of wild rice and 8 of the 50 quail eggs and go back for dessert. But Hattie could. Olive ate even more. Gooseberry tarts and currant bread and cream trifle and plum pudding and chocolate bonbons and spice cake, all dribbled over with butter rum sauce and apricot sauce and peppermint sauce. Can I tell you, this is like the only point in the book where I like kind of do relate to Hattie and Olive, who are obviously like the evil stepsisters. Excuse me, spoilers. I gotta try a little bit of everything if there's a buffet at a party. And this part, like, I don't know, it bugs me a tiny bit because I'm like, don't like food shame these girls. Let them enjoy the food. But, you know, also they're meant to be portrayed as gluttonous, so whatever. All right, back to the book. They brought their plates close to their faces so their forks had the shortest possible distance to travel. Olive ate steadily, but Hattie put her fork down every so often to pat her mouth daintily with her napkin. Then she'd tuck in again as avidly as ever. It was disgusting to watch. I looked down at a throw rug that used to lie under Mother's chair. Today it had been moved near the food. I had never concentrated on it before. A hound and hunters chased a boar toward a fringe of scarlet wool. As I stared, I saw movement. Wind stirred the grass by the boar's feet. I blinked, and the movement stopped. I stared again, and it started again. The dog had just bayed. I felt his throat relax. One of the hunters limped, and I felt a cramp in his calf. The boar gasped for breath and ran on fear and rage. What are you looking at? Olive asked. She had finished eating. I started. I felt as if I'd been in the rug. Nothing, just the carpet. I glanced at the rug again, an ordinary carpet with an ordinary design. Your eyes were popping out. They looked like an ogre's eyes, Hattie said. Buggy. But there, you look more normal now. She never looked normal. She looked like a rabbit. A fat one. The kind Mandy liked to slaughter for stew. And Olive's face was as blank as a peeled potato. I don't suppose your eyes ever pop out, I said. I don't think so. Hattie smiled complacently. They're too small to pop. The smile remained, but now it seemed pasted on. I forgive you, child. We in the peerage are forgiving. Your poor mother used to be known for her ill breeding, too. Mother used to be known. The past tense froze my tongue. Girls, Dame Olga bore down upon us. We must be going. She hugged me, and my nose filled with the stink of spoiled milk. They left. Father was outside at the iron gate saying goodbye to the rest of the guests. I went to Mandy in the kitchen. She was piling up dirty dishes. Seems like those people didn't eat for a week. I put on an apron and pumped water into the sink. They never tasted your food before. Mandy's cooking was better than anybody else's. Mother and I used to try her recipes sometimes. We'd follow the instructions exactly, and the dish would be delicious, but never as wonderful as when Mandy cooked it. Somehow it reminded me of the rug. The carpet in the hallways with the hunter and the boar. You know the one? Something funny happened to me when I looked at it before. Oh, that silly thing. You shouldn't pay attention to that old rug. She turned to stir a pot of soup. What do you mean? It's just a fairy joke. A fairy rug? How do you know? It belonged to Lady. Mandy always called Mother Lady. That wasn't an answer. Did my fairy godmother give it to her? A long time ago. Did Mother ever tell you who my fairy godmother is? No, she didn't. Where's your father? He's outside saying goodbye. Do you know anyway, even though she never told you? Know what? Who my fairy godmother is. If she'd wanted you to know, your mother would have told you. She was going to. She promised. Please tell, Mandy. I am. You are not telling. Who is it? Me. Your fairy godmother is me. Here, taste the carrot soup. It's for dinner. How is it? And that's the end of that chapter. So, big developments there. So now I think we've met our whole cast of, well, not our whole cast, but we've met like all the main players of the family, at least. These 2 chapters, they're not favorites of mine. I feel like the pacing is still very good. Like we've covered a lot of ground. We've met a lot of people in 2 short chapters. But I feel like a lot of it is stage setting for the rest of the book. So that I don't have a ton to say on it besides my sort of midstream commentary about the tiny bit of like, mild fat phobia that I didn't super love. I really love Hattie and Olive as characters. Like they're not, they suck. Like I love to hate them, but I think they're very well written as shitty characters. So excited for you guys to experience more of that. And yeah, I guess that's it. So we're on chapter 4 now. My mouth opened automatically. The spoon descended, and a hot, but not burning, swallow poured in. Mandy had gotten the carrots at their sweetest, carrotiest best. Weaving in and out of the carrots were other flavors, lemon, turtle broth, and a spice I couldn't name. The best carrot soup in the world. Magical soup that nobody but Mandy could make. The rug, the soup. This was fairy soup. Mandy was a fairy. Oh, can I also just say, this is Hannah now, not the book. The way that food is described in this book, I also think is really outstanding. Like I just love that description, how she says that flavors were weaving in and out of the carrot flavor. Just feels nice on my brain. So, but if Mandy was a fairy, why was Mother dead? You're not a fairy. Why not? If you were, you would have saved her. Oh, sweetie, I would have if I could. If she'd left the hair in my curing soup, she'd be well today. You knew? Why did you let her? I didn't know till she was too sick. We can't stop dying. I collapsed on a stool next to the stove, sobbing so hard I couldn't catch my breath. Then Mandy's arms were around me, and I was crying into the ruffles along the neck of her apron, where I had cried so many times before for smaller reasons. A drop landed on my finger. Mandy was crying too. Her face was red and blotchy. I was her fairy godmother too, Mandy said, and your grandmother's. She blew her nose. I pushed out of Mandy's arms for a new look at her. She couldn't be a fairy. Fairies were thin and young and beautiful. Mandy was as tall as a fairy was supposed to be, but who ever heard of a fairy with frizzy gray hair and 2 chins? Show me, I demanded. Show you what? That you're a fairy. Disappear or something. I don't have to show you anything. And with the exception of Lucinda, fairies never disappear when other creatures are present. Can you? We can, but we don't. Lucinda is the only one who's rude enough and stupid enough. Why is it stupid? Just hit the mic. Because it lets people know you're a fairy. She started to wash dishes. Help me. Do Nathan and Bertha know? I carried plates to the sink. Know what? You're a fairy. Oh, that again. No one knows but you, and you'd better keep it a secret. Mandy looked her fiercest. Why? She just scowled. I will, I promise, but why? I'll tell you. People only like the idea of fairies. When they bump up against a particular real as corn fairy, there's always trouble. She rinsed a platter. You dry. Why? Because the dishes are wet, that's why. She saw my surprised face. Oh, why is there trouble? 2 reasons mostly. People know we can do magic, so they want us to solve their problems for them. When we don't, they get mad. The other reason is we're immortal. That gets them mad too. Lady wouldn't speak to me for a week when her father died. Why doesn't Lucinda care if people know she's a fairy? She likes them to know, the fool. She wants them to thank her when she gives them one of her awful gifts. Are they always awful? Always. They are always awful, but some people are delighted to have a present from a fairy, even if it makes them miserable. Why did Mother know you're a fairy? Why do I know? All the Eleanor line are friends of the fairies. You have fairy blood in you. Fairy blood. Can I do magic? Shall I live forever? Would Mother have if she hadn't gotten sick? Are there many friends of the fairies? Very few. You're the only one left in Curia. And no, love, you can't do magic or live forever. It's just a drop of fairy blood. But there's one way it has already started to show. Your feet haven't grown for a few years, I'll warrant. None of me has grown for a few years. The rest of you will soon enough, but you'll have fairy feet, like your mother did. Mandy lifted the hems of her skirt and 5 petticoats to reveal feet that were no longer than mine. We're too tall for our feet. It's the only thing we can't change by magic. Our men stuff their shoes so no one can tell, and we ladies hide them under our skirts. I stuck a foot out of my gown. Tiny feet were fashionable, but would they make me even clumsier as I grew taller? Would I be able to keep my balance? Could you make my feet grow if you wanted to? Or I searched for another miracle. Rain pelted the window. Or could you stop the rain? Mandy nodded. Do it. Please do it. Why would I want to? For me, I want to see magic. Big magic. We don't do big magic. Lucinda's the only one. It's too dangerous. What's dangerous about ending a storm? Maybe nothing. Maybe something. Use your imagination. Clear skies would be good. People would go outside. Use your imagination, Mandy repeated. I thought, the grass needs rain. The crops need rain. More, Mandy said. Maybe a bandit was going to rob someone and he isn't doing it because of the weather? That's right. Or maybe I'd started drought and then I'd have to fix that because I started it. And then maybe the rain I sent would knock down a branch and smash into the roof of a house and I'd have to fix that too. That wouldn't be your fault. The owner should have built a stronger roof. Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe I'd cause a flood and people would be killed. That's the problem with big magic. I only do little magic. Good cooking, my curing soup, my tonic. When Lucinda cast a spell on me, was that big magic? Cast the spell on me. Of course it was, the numbskull. Mandy scoured a pot so hard that it clattered and banged against the copper sink. Tell me how to break the spell, please, Mandy. I don't know how. I only know it can be done. If I told Lucinda how terrible it is, would she lift the spell, do you think? I doubt it, but maybe. Then again, she might take away one spell and give you another even worse. The trouble with Lucinda is ideas pop into her head and come out as spells. What does she look like? Not like the rest of us, but you'd better hope you never lay eyes on her. Where does she live? I asked. If I could find her, maybe I could persuade her to lift my curse. After all, Mandy could be wrong. We're not on speaking terms. I don't keep track of the whereabouts of Lucinda the idiot. Watch that bowl! The order came too late. I got the broom. Are all friends clumsy? No, sweet. Fairy blood does not make you clumsy. That's human. You don't see me dropping plates, do you? I started to sweep, but it wasn't necessary. The pieces of pottery gathered themselves together and flew into the trash bin. I couldn't believe it. That's about all I do, honey. Small magic that can't hurt anybody. Handy sometimes, though. No sharp bits left on the floor. I stared into the bin. The shards lay there. Why didn't you turn it back into a bowl? The magic's too big. Doesn't seem like it, but it is. Could hurt someone, you never know. You mean fairies can't see the future? If you could, you'd know, wouldn't you? We can't see the future any more than you can. Only gnomes can. A few of them, anyway. A bell tinkled somewhere in the house, Father calling one of the servants. Mother never used the bell. Were you my great-grandmother's fairy godmother, too? 1,000 questions flooded in. How long have you been our fairy godmother? How old was Mandy, really? Bertha came in. Sir Peter wants you in the study, miss. What does he want? I asked. He didn't say. She twisted one of her braids, anxiously. Bertha was scared of everything. What was there to be afraid of? My father wanted to talk to me. It was only to be expected. I finished drying a plate, dried another, then a third. Best not tarry, little mistress, Bertha said. I reached for a fourth dish. You better go, Mandy said, and he won't want to see that apron. Mandy was frightened too. I took off the apron and left. I stopped just within the doorway of the study. Father sat in Mother's chair, examining something in his lap. Ah, there you are. He looked up. Come closer, Ella. I glared at him, resenting the order. Then I took one step forward. It was the game I played with Mandy, obedience and defiance. I asked you to come closer, Eleanor. I came closer. Not near enough. I won't bite you. I only want to get to know you a bit. He walked to me and led me to a chair facing him. Have you ever seen anything as splendid as this? He passed me the object he'd had in his lap. You can hold it. It's heavy for its size. Here. I decided to drop it since he liked it so much, but I glanced at it first, and then I couldn't. I held a porcelain castle no bigger than my 2 fists, with 6 wee towers, each ending in a miniature candle holder. And oh, strung between a window and each of the 2 towers was a gossamer thread of china, from which hung laundry, a man's hose, a robe, a baby's pinafore, all thin as a spider web. And painted in a window downstairs, a smiling maiden waved a silken scarf. It seemed to be silk anyway. Father took it from me. Close your eyes. I heard him pull the heavy drapes shut. I watched through slitted eyes. I didn't trust him. He placed the castle on the mantel, put in candles, and lit them. Open your eyes. I ran to look closer. The castle was a sparkling wonderland. The flames drew pearly tints out of the white walls, and the windows glowed yellow gold, suggesting cheerful fires within. Oh, I said. I didn't really sell that. Sorry, guys. Father opened the drapes and blew out the candles. Lovely, isn't it? I nodded. Where did you get it? From the elves. An elf made it. They're marvelous potters. One of Aguilin's students made this. I've always wanted an Agulin, but I haven't got any yet. Where will you put it? Where do you want me to put it, Ella? In a window. Not in your room? In any room, but in a window, so it could wink out at everyone. Inside and on the street. Father stared at me for a long moment. I shall tell its buyer to place it in a window. You're going to sell it? I'm a merchant, Ella. I sell things. For a minute he spoke to himself, and perhaps I can pass this one off as a genuine Agulin. Who could tell? He came back to me. Now you know who I am. Sir Peter, the merchant. I'm sorry, I think this is how that should be read. Now you know who I am, Sir Peter, the merchant. But who are you? A daughter who used to have a mother. He waved that aside. But who is Ella? A lass who doesn't wish to be interrogated. He was pleased. You have courage to speak to me so. He looked me over. That's my chin. He touched it, and I drew back. Strong, determined. That's my nose. I hope you don't mind that the nostrils flare. My eyes, except yours, are green. Most of your face belongs to me. I wonder how it will be on a woman when you grow up. Gross. That was me. That was my commentary. Why did he think it was fine to talk about me as though I were a portrait instead of a maiden? What shall I do with you? He asked himself. Why must you do something with me? I can't leave you to grow up a cook's helper. You must be educated. He changed the subject. What did you think of Dame Olga's daughters? Oh, Dame Olga. That's right. That was her name. They were not comforting, I said. Father laughed, really laughed, head back, shoulders heaving. What was so funny? I disliked being laughed at. It made me want to say something nice about the loathsome Hattie and Olive. They meant well, I suppose. Father wiped tears from his eyes. They didn't mean well. The older one is an unpleasant conniver like her mother, and the younger one is a simpleton. It never entered their heads to mean well. His voice became thoughtful. Dame Olga is titled and rich. What did that have to do with anything? Perhaps I should send you to finishing school with her daughters. You might learn how to walk like the slip of a thing you are, and not like a small elephant. Finishing school? I'd have to leave Mandy. And they'd tell me what to do all the time, and I'd have to do it, whatever it was. They'd try to rid me of my clumsiness, but they wouldn't be able to, so they'd punish me, and I'd punish them back, and they'd punish me more. Why can't I just stay here? She said that part aloud. I suppose you could be taught by a governess, if I could find someone. I would much rather have a governess, Father. I would study very hard if I had a governess. But not otherwise? His eyebrows rose, but I could tell he was amused. He stood and went to the desk where Mother used to work out our household accounts. You may go now. I have work to do. I left. On my way out, I said, perhaps small elephants cannot be admitted to finishing school. Perhaps small elephants cannot be finished. Perhaps they... I stopped. He was laughing again. So that was chapter 4. Something that I think I have never talked about in the podcast that I like about Ella Enchanted is their treatment of fairies. I've talked about how much I like what they do with the elves, and we'll talk about that later when they actually show up and stuff. And you got a little taste of like the type of work that, or like art that they make, which is cool in this chapter. But I really think it's interesting that fairies in this world, besides the one who is like a total menace, Lucinda, are so reserved and secretive. It's one of those things that, I mean, for one thing, I think it's a little bit more true to like the original stories about fairies, but I don't know enough to speak anymore on that, really. I would like to. I'd like to learn about it, but I haven't. But it's also, I don't know. I just think it's really fascinating. Like they're just out there, and they're hiding, and they have the ability to do so much, but they have lived long enough to know better than to do it. And it's kind of, I think, more realistic of what an eternal creature would behave like, than that they would just like walk around granting wishes for whoever. So I just like it. I think it's interesting to think about. Here's chapter 5. The next night I had to dine with Father. I had trouble sitting down at the table because Bertha had made me wear a fashionable gown. My petticoat was voluminous. On Father's plate and mine was sparrow grass covered with a tarragon mustard sauce. In front of his plate was a many-faceted crystal goblet. When I finally managed to settle in my chair, Father signaled to Nathan to pour wine into the goblet. "See how it catches the light, Eleanor?" He raised it. "It makes the wine sparkle like a garnet. It's pretty." "Is that all? Just pretty?" "It's very pretty, I suppose." I refused to love it. He was going to sell it too. "You may appreciate it more if you drink from it. Have you ever tasted wine?" Mandy never, I'm having trouble saying the name Mandy, who is the cook, the fairy godmother cook. Mandy never let me. I reached for the goblet and trailed my balloon sleeves through the sparrowgrass sauce. But the goblet was too far away. I had to stand. I stood on my skirt and lost my balance, pitching forward. To stop my fall, I brought my arm crashing down on the table and knocked into Father's elbow. He dropped the goblet. It fell and broke neatly into 2 pieces, stem severed from body. A red stain spread across the tablecloth, and Father's doublet was dotted with wine. I steeled myself for his rage, but he surprised me. "That was stupid of me," he said, dabbing at his clothes with a napkin. "When you came in, I saw you couldn't manage yourself." I feel like, look, I've held probably more goblets than, this is Hannah, this is commentary. I've held probably more goblets than like the average 21st century middle-class American because the company I work for sells them. And I feel like that's maybe on the person that made the goblet, because falling from a table to the floor and breaking so neatly like that, if it's shattered, like that's one thing. But that feels like maybe it wasn't connected well enough. I'm just saying. What do I know? I'm not a merchant. I guess I am, kind of. Sort of. Anyway. Nathan and a serving maid whisked away the tablecloth and broken glass. "I apologize," I said. "That won't put the crystal back together, will it?" he snapped, then collected himself. "Your apology is accepted. We will both change our clothes and begin our meal." I returned in a quarter hour in an everyday gown. "It is my fault," Father said, cutting into a sparrowgrass spear. "I've let you grow up an oaf." "I'm not an oaf." Mandy wasn't one to mince words, and she'd never called me that. Clumsy, bumbling, gawky, but never an oaf. Blunderer, lumpkin, fumblefoot, but never an oaf. "But you're young enough to learn," Father went on. "Someday I may take you into civilized company." "I don't like civilized company." "I may need civilized company to like you." "I've made up my mind. It's off to finishing school with you." "I couldn't go. I wouldn't." "You said I could have a governess. Wouldn't that be less expensive than sending me away?" A serving maid whisked away my uneaten sparrowgrass and replaced it with scallops and tomato aspic. "How kind of you to worry. A governess would be much more expensive. And I have the time to interview governesses. Sorry, I haven't the time to interview governesses. In 2 days you shall go to finishing school with Dame Olga's daughters." Ah, Dame Olga, that's her name. "I won't," he continued as though I hadn't spoken. "I'll write a letter to the headmistress, which I shall entrust to you, along with a purse filled with enough KJs to stop her protests against a last-minute pupil." "I won't go." "You shall do as I say, Eleanor." "I won't go." "Ella," he bit into a scallop and spoke while he chewed. "Your father is not a good man, as the servants have already warned you, unless I miss my guess." I didn't deny it. "They may have said I'm selfish, and I am. They may have said I'm impatient, and I am. They may have said I always have my way, and I do." "I do too," I lied. He grinned at me admiringly. "My daughter is the bravest wench in Kyria." The smile vanished, and his mouth tightened into a hard, thin line. "But she shall go to finishing school if I have to take her there myself, and it will not be a pleasant trip if I have to lose time from my trading because of you. Do you understand, Ella?" Angry, Father reminded me of a carnival toy, a leather fist attached to a coiled spring used in puppet shows. When the spring was released, the fist shot out at a hapless puppet. With Father, it wasn't the fist that frightened me. It was the spring, because the spring determined the force of the blow. The anger in his eyes was so tightly coiled that I didn't know what would happen if his spring were tripped. I hated being frightened, but I was. I'll go to finishing school. I couldn't help adding, but I shall loathe it. His grin was back. "You are free to loathe or to love it as long as you go." It was a taste of obedience without an order, and I didn't like it any better than the Lucinda-induced kind. Lucinda is the fairy who gave her the curse gift. I left the dining room, and he didn't stop me. Sorry, I moved the mic somehow. It was early evening. In spite of the hour, I went up to my room and donned my nightgown. Then I moved my dolls, Flora and Rosamund, into bed and climbed in. They had stopped sleeping with me years before, but tonight I needed special comfort. I gathered them to my stomach and waited for sleep. But sleep was busy elsewhere. Tears started. I pushed Flora against my face. Sweetie, the door opened. It was Mandy with tonic and a box. By the way, I don't remember any of the voices I did. I'm certain I didn't do accents, except for like the weird Dame Olga one. But I don't know what I did for Mandy, so forgive me. Anyway, Mandy came in with tonic. I felt bad enough. No tonic, Mandy. I'm fine. Truly. Oh, lovey. She put down the tonic and the box and held me, stroking my forehead. I don't want to go, I said into her shoulder. I know, honey, she said. She held me for a long while, until I was almost asleep. Then she shifted her weight. Tonic time. I'll skip tonight. No, you won't. Not tonight especially. I won't have you getting sick when you need your strength. A spoon came out of her apron. Take it. 3 spoons. I braced myself. Tonic was nutty and good, but it felt slimy, like swallowing a frog. Each spoonful oozed along my throat. I continued to gulp after it was down to rid myself of the sensation. But it made me feel better. A little better. Ready to talk anyway. I settled myself back in Mandy's lap. Why did Mother marry him? This question had troubled me since I was old enough to think about it. Until she was his wife, Sir Peter was very sweet to Lady. I didn't trust him, but she wouldn't listen to me. Her family didn't approve because he was poor, which made Lady want him even more. She was that kind-hearted. I know I read that badly. Mandy's hand stopped his comforting journey up and down my forehead. Ella, pet, try to keep him from learning about the spell on you. Why? What would he do? He likes to have his way too much. He'd use you. Mother ordered me not to tell about the curse, but I wouldn't anyway. That's right. Her hand went back to work on my forehead. I closed my eyes. What will it be like, do you think? At school? Well, some of the lasses will be lovely. Sit up, sweet. Do you want your presents? I had forgotten about the box, but there had been only one. Presents? One at a time. Mandy handed me the box I'd seen. For you, wherever you go your whole life. Inside the box was a book of fairy tales. I had never seen such beautiful illustrations. They were almost alive. I turned the pages, marveling. When you look at it, you can remember me and take comfort. I'll save it until I leave, so the stories will be new. Mandy chuckled. You won't finish it so fast. It grows on you. She fished in the pocket of her apron and fetched out a tissue paper packet. From Lady. She would have wanted you to have it. It was Mother's necklace. Threads of silver ended almost at my waist in a woven pattern of silver studded with tiny pearls. I've always thought this necklace sounded so beautiful. I wish that there were more illustrations of it. Actually, like all the jewelry in this book sounds incredible. You'll grow into it, sweet, and look as lovely wearing it as your mother did. I'll wear it always. You'd be wise to keep it under your gown when you go out. It's that valuable. Gnomes made it. The bell tinkled downstairs. That father of yours is ringing. I hugged Mandy and clung to her. She disentangled from my arms. Let me go, love. Planting a kiss on my cheek, she left. I settled back into bed, and this time sleep claimed me. So that's chapter 5. Chapter 6 will be next time, which hopefully will be next week, voice allowing. I wanted to say about the book, not to spoil the movie, but it's, vastly inferior anyway. In the movie, the book that Mandy just gave Ella is in the movie, but instead of being like a book of fairy tales, it's it's a book that Mandy accidentally like put her boyfriend's soul into, and so it's like a talking book that is her boyfriend, and it's weird, and I hate it. And Mandy is played by Minnie Driver, and while she does a great job, she's certainly not like an old kitchen witch looking person like in the book. So overall, just another reason why the book Ella Enchanted is better, and the book Mandy gives Ella in the book Ella Enchanted is better than the book Mandy gives Ella in the movie. That was such a confusing configuration of statements, but here we are. The next morning, I woke with my fingers curled around Mother's necklace. The clock in King Gerald's palace was just striking 6. Perfect. I wanted to rise early and spend the day saying goodbye to the places I loved best. I put my gown over the necklace and crept down to the pantry, where I found a tray of freshly baked scones. They were hot, so I tossed 2 in the air and caught them in my skirt, pulling it out like a basket. Then, looking down at my breakfast, I ran to the front of the house and right into Father. He was in the entranceway, waiting for Nathan to bring the carriage around. I don't have time for you now, Eleanor. Run off and bang into somebody else. And tell Mandy I'll be back with the bailiff. We'll need lunch. As instructed, I ran off. Aside from its dangerous aspects, the curse often made a fool of me and was partly the reason I seemed so clumsy. Now I had to bang into someone. Oh yeah, and in case anyone also forgot that, Ella has a curse on her, which makes her have to obey any direct orders. It's already been important. It's gonna continue to be. And her dad's a total asshole. And her mom's dead. Bertha was carrying wet laundry. When I bumped into her, she dropped her basket. My gowns and stockings and undergarments tumbled onto the tiles. I helped her pick them up, but she was going to have to wash everything over again. Little mistress, it's hard enough getting your things ready so quick without having to do it twice, she scolded. After I apologized, and after I delivered Father's message to Mandy, and after she made me sit down and eat breakfast on a plate, I started for the royal menagerie just outside the walls of the king's palace. My favorite exhibits were the talking birds and the exotic animals. Except for the Hydra in her swamp and the baby dragon, the exotics, the unicorn, the herd of centaurs, and the griffin family lived on an island meadow surrounded by an extension of the castle moat. The dragon was kept in an iron cage. He was beautiful in his tiny ferocity and seemed happiest when flaming, his ruby eyes gleaming evilly. I bought a morsel of yellow cheese from the stand next to the cage and toasted it in the fire, which was a tricky business, getting close enough for cooking, but not so close that the dragon got the treat. I wondered what King Gerald planned to do with him when he grew up. I wondered also whether I would be home to learn his fate. Beyond the dragon, a centaur stood near the moat, gazing at me. Did centaurs like cheese? I walked toward him quietly, hoping he wouldn't gallop off. Here, a voice said. I turned. It was Prince Charmant, offering me an apple. Thank you. Holding out my hand, I edged closer to the moat. The centaur's nostrils flared, and he trotted towards me. I tossed the apple. 2 other centaurs galloped over, but mine caught the treat and started eating, crunching loudly. I always expect them to thank me or say, "How dare you stare?" I said. They're not smart enough to talk. See how blank their eyes are? He pointed, teaching me. I knew all that. Perhaps it was a princely duty to explain matters to one's subjects. If they had words, I said, they wouldn't be able to think of anything to say. A surprised silence followed, then Char laughed. That's funny. You're funny. As the Lady Eleanor was. He looked stricken. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to remind you. I think of her often, I said. Most of the time. We walked along the edge of the moat. Would you like an apple too? He held out another one. I wanted to make him laugh again. I pawed at the ground with my right foot and tossed my head as though I had a mane. Opening my eyes as wide as they'd go, I stared stupidly at Char and took the apple. He did laugh. Then he made an announcement. I like you. I'm quite taken with you. He took a third apple for himself out of the pocket of his cape. This guy has a lot of apples. I liked him too. He wasn't haughty or disdainful or stuffy as High Chancellor Thomas was. All the carrions bowed when we passed, and the visiting elves and gnomes did too. I didn't know how to respond, but Char raised his arm each time, bent at the elbow in the customary royal salute. It was habit, as natural to him as teaching. I decided on a deep nod. Curtsies often tipped me over. We came to the parrot cages, my other favorite place. The birds spoke all the languages of the earth, human foreign tongues and the exotic tongues of Gnomic, Elfian, Ogrese, and Abdegi, the language of the giants. I loved to imitate them, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Simon, their keeper, was my friend. When he saw Char, he bowed low. Then he returned to feeding an orange bird. This one's new, he said. Speaks Gnomic and doesn't shut up. And then there is, this happens a few times in this book. They spell out languages that don't exist, phrases in languages that don't exist. So I'm going to do my best. Gnomic. Futur eftug brze irth yimadbuk eftug brze, the parrot said. And then she repeats it. I'm not going to try that again because she does a good job and I certainly wouldn't. So she repeats it exactly. You speak Gnomic, Char said. I like to make the sounds. I only know what a few words mean. She does it just right, doesn't she, Your Highness? Futar ever brze. Char gave up. It sounded better when you did it. And then the parrot says some other Gnomic words. Do you know what he said? I asked Simon, who was able to translate occasionally. Simon shook his head. Do you know, sir? No, it sounds like gargling. Other visitors claimed Simon's attention. Excuse me, he said. Char watched while I said farewell to each bird. Ikwo pwach brze uf dehi. That was Nomic for until we dig again. Athun sing ogres for much eating. Ai oh how. That's a howl. Bek au. Abdegi for I miss you already. Por ol peswado. Elfian for walk in the shade. I memorized the sight of the birds and Simon. Goodbye, I called. He waved. Lest they be frightened out of their feathers, a garden separated the birds from the ogres. We passed beds of flowers while I tried to teach Char a few of the words he'd just heard. His memory was good, but his accent was unalterably Kyrian. If they heard me, the elves would never let me stand under a tree again. The gnomes would hit you over the head with a shovel. Would the ogres decide I was unworthy of consumption? We neared their hut. Even though they were locked in, soldiers were posted within arrow range. An ogre glared at us through a window. Ogres weren't dangerous only because of their size and their cruelty. They knew your secrets just by looking at you, and they used their knowledge. When they wanted to be, they were irresistibly persuasive. By the end of an ogre's first sentence in Kyrian, you forgot his pointy teeth, the dried blood under his fingernails, and the coarse black hair that grew on his face in clumps. He became handsome in your eyes, and you thought him your best friend. By the end of the second sentence, you were so won over that he could do whatever he wanted with you. Drop you in a pot to cook, or, if he was in a hurry, eat you raw. Pwech au sauk, a soft lisping voice said. Did you hear that? I asked. Doesn't sound like an ogre. Where did it come from? Pwech au sauk, the voice repeated, this time with a hint of tears in its tone. A toddler gnome poked his head out of an aqueduct only a few feet from the hut. I saw him at the same moment the ogre did. He could reach the child through the unglazed window. I started for the boy, but Char was quicker. He snatched him up just before the ogre's arm shot out. Char backed away, holding the youngster, who squirmed to get out of his grasp. Give him to me, I said, thinking I might be able to quiet him. Char handed him over. Si fra min, the ogre hissed, glaring at Char. Okay, then there's more ogres. I just can't do it, you guys. Then he turned to me, and his expression changed. He started laughing. Monax among minwatsi. I wonder if this is like, I wonder if she like went to the trouble of, making the languages somewhat consistent. I mean, I doubt she like built whole languages like they did for like Lord of the Rings, but I wonder if she made like some grammar rules and stuff like that. Like you can definitely, I will say this, it's certainly not coming through in my reading, but you can like, they all look aesthetically very different, even on the page, the different like languages. That's kind of neat. Like I like how distinctive they all are and how they kind of are a reflection of the societies that they're from. Like the ogres just looks really slimy, Anyway, he's laughing and he's talking and I'm not reading it. Tears of mirth streaked down his cheeks, leaving trails on his filthy face. Then he said in Kyrian, not bothering to make his voice persuasive, "Come to me and bring the child." I stood my ground. Now I had to break the curse. My life and another's depended on it. My knees began to tremble from the need to walk. I held back and my muscles cramped, shooting pain through my calves. I squeezed the little gnome in my effort to resist, and he yelped and twisted in my arms. The ogre continued to laugh. Then he spoke again. "Obey me this instant. Come, now." Against my will, I took a step. I stopped, and the trembling started again. Another step, and another. I saw nothing except that leering face, looming closer and closer. So that's the end of chapter 6. So, very bad news for Ella, that the ogres can tell that they don't even have to be persuasive with her. All right, so chapter 7. "Where are you going?" Char cried. He could see where I was going. "I must," I said. "Stop! I command you to stop." I stopped and stood shaking while soldiers crowded around the hut, their swords pointed at the ogre, who glared at me, then turned his back and retreated into the dim interior. "Why did you listen to him?" Char asked. I was still having trouble with the child. He was pulling his little beard and wriggling to escape. "I was afraid," he cried. That's not at all what that says. I'm so sorry. I used his distress to avoid answering the question. "He's frightened." But Char wasn't distracted. "Why did you listen to him, Ella?" I had to answer somehow. His eyes, I lied. Something about them. I had to do what he wanted. Have they found a new way to bewitch us? Char sounded alarmed. I must tell my father. The gnome child wailed, thrashing in the air. I wondered if the parrot's words might soothe him. I spoke them, hoping they weren't an insult. And then she says the thing that she said before. The child's face cleared, and he smiled, showing pearly baby teeth. And then the child says something back, also in, I forget what he is, a gnomish. He repeated, there was a dimple in the folds of wrinkles and baby fat. I put him down, and he took my hand in Char's. His parents must be worried, I said. I didn't know how to ask him where they were, and he was probably too young to answer. They weren't by the ferocious beasts or by the grazing animals. At last, we spied an ancient female gnome sitting on the ground near the pond. Her head was between her knees, an image of defeat. Other gnomes searched the reeds and hedges or questioned passers-by. Freshman, the little gnome called, pulling at Char and me. The old gnome stood up, her face wet with tears. Schluff! She grabbed him in a tight hug and covered his face and beard with kisses. Then she peered at us and recognized Char. Highness, thank you for the return of my grandson. Char coughed, an embarrassed sound. We're glad to bring him back, madam, he said. He was almost an ogre's lunch. Prince Charmant saved him, I said, and saved me too. You have the gratitude of the gnomes. The gnome bowed her head. I am Zataf. Hardly taller than I, she was much wider, not stout but wide, which is the direction gnomes grow after they reach adulthood. She was the most dignified personage I had ever seen, and the oldest, except for Mandy probably. Her wrinkles had wrinkles, small folds and deeper folds of leathery skin. Her eyes were deep set, and their copper color was clouded. I curtsied and wobbled. I'm Ella, I said. More gnomes came, and we were surrounded. How did you persuade him to come with you? Zataf asked. He would not go with most humans. Ella spoke to him, Char said, sounding proud of me. What did you say? I hesitated. It was one thing to imitate parrots for Simon or to speak to a baby. It was another to sound like a fool in front of this stately lady. And then she says the thing again. It's so long. Okay, if you saw it, you would understand. I finally said. No wonder he came with you, Zataf said. Zulf cried joyously. He squirmed in her arms. A younger gnome woman took the child. Where did you learn to speak gnomic? She asked. I am Zulf's mother. I explained about the parrots. What did I say to Zulf? It is an expression. We say it in greeting, Zataf said. In Kyrian it is, digging is good for the wealth and good for the health. She held her hand out to me. Zulf is not the only one you will save. I see it. What else could she see? Mandy had said a few gnomes could tell the future. Can you see what's ahead for me? Gnomes do not see detail. What you will wear tomorrow, what you will say are mysteries. I see outlines only. What are they? Danger, a quest, 3 figures. They are close to you, but they are not your friends. She let my hand go. Beware of them. On our way out of the menagerie, Char said, Tonight I shall triple the guard around the ogres, and soon I shall catch a centaur and give it to you. Dame Olga was, then there's like a line break, so we're doing like a time jump to, I think, the next day. Dame Olga was punctual. She and her daughters watched while my trunk and a barrel of tonic were loaded on top of the coach. Father was there to see me off, and Mandy stood at a distance. How few things you... Oh, God. I did... Okay, I will do these voices. I'll try. How few things you have, Hattie told me. Dame Olga agreed. Ella is not outfitted in accordance with her station, Sir Peter. My girls have 8 trunks between them. Hattie has 5.5 trunks, Mother, and I have only... Olive stopped speaking to count on her fingers. Less. I have less, and it's not fair. Father cut in smoothly. It's most kind of you to take Ella with you, Dame Olga. I only hope she won't be a bother. Oh, she won't bother me, Sir P. I'm not going. Father winced at the abbreviation. Dame Olga continued. With a coachman and 2 footmen, they will be safe from everything except ogres. And from ogres, I could offer little protection. Besides, they'll have more fun without their old mother. After a pause, Father said, Not old. Never old. Madam, he turned to me. I wish you a comfortable journey, child. He kissed my cheek. I'll miss you. Liar. That's in the book. But also I agree. A footman opened the coach door. Hattie and Olive were handed in. I ran to Mandy. I couldn't leave without a last hug. Make them all disappear, please, I whispered. Oh, Ella, sweetie, you'll be fine. She clasped me hard. Eleanor, your friends are waiting. Father called. I climbed into the coach, stowing a small carpet bag in a corner, and we started to move. For comfort, I touched my chest where Mother's necklace was concealed. If she were alive, I wouldn't be rolling away from home in the company of these creatures. I would never embrace a cook, Hattie shuddered. No, I agree. What cook would let you? Hattie returned to an earlier subject. With so few belongings, the other girls will hardly know whether you're a servant or one of us. Why does your gown pucker in front? Olive asked. Is that a necklace? Why wear it under your clothes? Hattie asked. Is it ugly? Olive said. Is that why you hide it? It's not ugly. Show it to us. Ollie and I want to see it. An order. I brought it out. It didn't matter here. There were no thieves to steal it. Ooh, Olive said. It's even nicer than Mama's best chain. No one would think you were a servant with that. It's very fine, although it's much too long for you. Hattie fingered the silver ropes. Olive, see how milky the pearls are? Olive's fingers joined Hattie's. Let go. I shifted out of their reach. We won't hurt it. May I try it on? Mother lets me try on her necklaces and I never hurt them. No, you can't. Oh, let me. There's a dear. An order. Do I have to? I asked. It slipped out. I could have swallowed my tongue. Hattie's eyes glittered. Yes, you have to. Give it over. Just for a minute, I said, unclasping it. I didn't delay. They mustn't see me struggle against the curse. Fasten it around my neck. I did so. Olive. The order had been for her sister. Thank you, my dear. Hattie settled back in her seat. I was born to wear jewels like this. Let me try it, Ella, Olive said. When you're older, Hattie answered. But I had to obey. I tried desperately to ignore Olive's order, but all my complaints started. Churning stomach, pounding temples, shortness of breath. Let her have her turn, I said through clenched teeth. See, Olive said. Ella says I can. I know what's best for you, Olive. You and Ella are both too young. I lunged at her and unfastened the necklace before she had time to stop me. Don't give it to her, Ella, Hattie said. Return it to me. I did. Give it to me, Ella, Olive said, her voice rising. Don't be so mean, Hattie. I snatched the necklace back from Hattie and passed it to Olive. Hattie stared at me. I could see her start to work out what had happened. Mother wore that necklace to her wedding, I said, hoping to deflect her thoughts. And her mother, are you always so obedient, Ella? Return the necklace to me. I won't let her, Olive said. Yes, you will, or else you get no dinner tonight. I took the necklace away from Olive. Hattie fastened it around her neck and patted it complacently. Ella, you should give it to me. It would be a token of our friendship. We're not friends. Yes, we are. I'm devoted to you. Olive likes you too, don't you, Ollie? Olive nodded solemnly. I believe you will give it to me if I say you must. Do so, Ella, for friendship's sake. You must. No, I wouldn't. She couldn't have it. You can have it. The words burst from me. Thank you. What a generous friend we have, Olive. She changed the subject. The servants were careless when they cleaned the coach. That dust ball is a disgrace. We shouldn't have to ride in such filth. Pick it up, Ella. An order I liked. I grabbed the dust and ground it into her face. It becomes you, I said. But the satisfaction was fleeting. And that's the end of chapter 7. So next time, I can't promise next week, but hopefully next week, we will read chapter 8. I really like those two chapters because I think, as hard as it is to read dialogue for me and all of that, all of those fake foreign languages, I really like the development of the relationship between Ella and Char. And I really enjoy the fact that she's just being herself and he's just very appreciative of that. This book, it doesn't give a ton more time than any other kind of young adult romance to developing the relationship between the two, the main character and the love interest. But I think the time that it does give is well structured, and I think it kind of shows him to be a good guy who is genuinely falling for her rather than just they're two fated star-crossed lovers at first sight, just that's not really a thing in this book. And also I think I mentioned it maybe back when I talked about the book for the second time on the podcast, but the all the sort of backstory and world building that goes into all the different races, the gnomes and the ogres, I think is really interesting and well done. So that's that.